Hello, this is Joseph Miles, and this is my presentation for BHI 509. I have it titled Data Extraction, Transformation, and Integration for Loading Data into a Psychiatric Research Data Warehouse. I wanted to make sure that I had the word data in there 3 times to emphasize the importance of data. The decentralized nature of our scientific communities and healthcare systems has created a sea of valuable but incompatible electronic databases. We have lots of data out there, and it's spread amongst many different facilities, but it's being recorded differently, different formats, using different semantics. An answer to that is to create a data warehouse to bring all of this data in together so that we can analyze it. And by doing that, we increase the accuracy of that data, the reliability of that data, the consistency based on the rules of creating that data warehouse. That data becomes accessible by all of the contributing factors. And because of the structure of the data warehouse, you also improve completeness of that data. And then the big one, interpretability, that you can run analysis and do the things that you need to do with that data to perform analysis and create some information and knowledge and increase science. Currently, this is what data looks like. You have multiple different locations. You have the different colors there. I mean, that's recorded a little bit differently, and you have to find a way to bring them all together because you might have a different label on something, but it might mean the same thing. You might have the same label, but it might not mean exactly the same thing between one facility to another. Or more likely, you have the same label, but the way that it was recorded might use a different scale from one facility to another. So the importance of ETL, extraction, transformation, and loading of that data into a data warehouse is of highest importance. Can't analyze the data unless it's all on the same scale and using the same titles and semantics. So one of the issues that we're running into as far as our project goes is that we are working under a system of diagnosis groups such as depression, but the presentation of many patients with depression is going to be very different patient to patient. And it's hard to find commonality between all these different presentations. If you look at the bottom 4 here, you have decreased energy or fatigue or feeling restless. You have difficulty sleeping or oversleeping. And when you have a grouping of people with such polar opposite symptoms, it's kind of hard to analyze that research unless you break it down into finer pieces. And that's part of what we're working on as far as this research domain criteria. We do tend to treat patients based on their diagnosis. You're a depressed patient, we will give you something for depression, rather than treating the actual problem that established that original diagnosis, amongst the symptoms from the previous slide. So the goal of RDoC, or the methods behind it, are to integrate many levels of information from genomics to self-report, and that also includes environmental factors, looking at race, ethnicity, patient age, a lot of different factors that they're bringing into this data warehouse to better understand basic dimensions of functioning underlying the full range of human behavior from normal to abnormal. One of the goals, especially when you're looking at different presentations at different ages, is this idea that the best time to address a mental illness is before the appearance of symptoms that disrupt daily life. If somebody has that heredity that they're possibly going to have an issue in the future, what sort of safe options are there for helping that person maintain a normal daily life and avoid the situation where things have to get ugly before there's any sort of intervention? So we're accumulating a lot of this data And I've mentioned already the genetics component, genomics, and then specifically inheritance is one of the things that we're looking at, because our study is a family study, looking at children, siblings, and their biological parents. And leading up to this research, a publication from Hess and Associates, they found very poor correlations between what we know now as possible candidate genes and the different psychiatric conditions that we were looking at. And as far as our squared values, it's that correlation coefficient, and the goal is to be as close to 1 as possible. 1 means that there's a direct correlation. You have that candidate gene, you have the problem. That's a 1. So the 0.181 to 0.233 essentially says that there's a 20% chance, if you have that candidate gene, that you will likely have that phenotype. You'll have those traits that they're looking for. And that is a very weak correlation. So the hope is that once we accumulate lots of data, that we'll find new candidate genes and be able to better predict these psychiatric conditions. Also, in the realm of big data, we're pulling in lots of information concerning level of education, employment status, household income, as I mentioned, race and ethnicity, and self-symptomology will help link these phenotypes to the genetic information that we are recording from number 1 above. And as I previously mentioned, assessing those differences as patients age. And our goal in our particular study is to do this longitudinally, so that the children that we are now observing and recording data on, that we can continue to follow them into adulthood. So this is from the National Institute of Mental Health, and an image of what I was discussing earlier with depression, with schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, psychotic bipolar disorder, and you see how heterogeneous the mix of people are, and then you pull them into one big group of psychoses, and how do you manage a patient population like that? And our goal is to be able to create homogeneous groups, so that everybody in biotype 1 will have predictable brain activities, what they're showing there. And once you have people grouped together like that, then you can better predict effective treatments and safe treatments, and treat the specific problems that person is having, rather than a title of diagnosis that you see in the top half of this slide. So this is a little bit about the family study that we're doing through Upstate Medical University. For each family unit that comes in and is observed, the primary research subject is a child, which we refer to as the proband, with a mental health issue. And that's non-specific, just any mental health issue. And so we are observing as much as we can biological parents and biological siblings. And when I say observe, we go beyond that. That's down at the bottom. You can see that of the 1,362 people that we have in our database right now, we have potential genetic information from whole blood samples and saliva samples that we will be able to use for genetic testing, to tie to the different phenotypes that we are observing amongst the 465 families that have come in. And of note here is also that mentioning that currently each person that comes in has 96 different variables of data, essentially, that we have recorded about each individual. So what we are currently responsible to do is, for the data warehouse, every 6 months we have to upload our cumulative research. And right now it's demographic information, as you see in the bottom. It's two different files. One is the family studies demographics, which contains 53 variables concerning all members of the family. And then the second file has each individual in their own record, and there are 51 variables for each individual, which what made this a little complicated is the fact that each individual, they also request who their siblings and parents are. So it wasn't as simple as just pulling data from that individual. You still had to find their siblings and parents and integrate that data into the file as well. This is the data dictionary, so to speak, that is provided by the National Institute of Mental Health, telling what each title means for their variables, and then on the right there you can see value ranges. As you can see, sometimes they use a code like MF for male and female, or you have to have it completely written out precisely, as you see for race of study subjects, American Indian / Alaska Native. So they do not use a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 type of code. So as we transformed the data, we had to make sure that we precisely worded everything the way that National Institute of Mental Health has listed there. I broke out the 52 titles that they use. So as far as a slide goes, there's not a whole lot you can get from this because they're all abbreviated, but this is the data dictionary that I used as far as looking at this and figuring out what information I needed to pull in for the integration step of this process. This is the data dictionary for the second file, and the 51 different variables. The first index when dealing with these things is usually numbered 0, so that's why it's 0 to 50 rather than 1 to 51. So for each family, we had up to 7 people because National Institute of Mental Health, their file only accounts for up to 4 siblings of the proband. So as we were pulling this in, there were up to 672 variables for each family that we had to extract the data from to create the upload files. 2 variables for each individual include the family ID and the individual ID. And when you combine those two, it does create a unique key. So it's basically a composite of those two made our primary key for the database that I used for integrating the data. And then amongst all of those variables, there were only 12 other variables from each individual that I needed to flesh out those upload files. There was a 15th piece of information that I also needed, and it is from the National Institute of Mental Health. I have a second file that has a listing of their unique identifiers. They call it the GUID, Global Unique Identifier. So part of the integration was reading a second file and then pulling in this GUID as the identifier for each individual when we upload the file to the National Institute of Mental Health's staging area for their data warehouse. So to simplify the data dictionary even further, this was more my working dictionary. Once I got down to those 14 key variables, I have those listed here and more defined as to what they are. And then the second column is what I use to note from the value ranges that National Institute of Mental Health sent us of whether or not I needed to convert that data to transform it to the precise format requested by the National Institute of Mental Health. So all the yeses mean I had to factor that into the program that I wrote. Then as I sat down and figured out how I was going to write this program, since it doesn't require a whole lot of user interface, only user interface is just asking which file is the input file and then where to send the output. this is the timeline of how the program runs. So the first step, the read subject attribute titles, is because the spreadsheet that I was looking at, as far as the source data for each individual, looked like this. This is just a sampling of the headers, and these headers aren't in a static location. So I couldn't tell the program, look in column C for individual ID, or I had to have the program actually read each of the category titles and figure out where date of birth is, where gender is, where the racial category is, which is fun when there are two different columns labeled racial category. So that is the first step of the process, is to read these and find out at which index those categories are located in the spreadsheet. So once those are found, I could extract those 14 pieces of data, transform the ones that needed to be transformed, and once I had all of those people together, overall it wasn't a huge file, so I just had it kept in working memory for the computer, so it could quickly sort that data. And since I was using a primary key of the family, it automatically put people into groups, and then the secondary key, second part of that key is the individual ID. So within the family, they were put in order from 1 to 7, 1 being the proband, primary subject, 2 being the father, 3 being the mother, and then 4 through 7 were the siblings, if there were siblings at all. And it was always like that. So if there was a mother but no father, then there would be no 02. So it was really nice how it's sorted and just all came together. Then we had to read in the file from the National Institute of Mental Health to get that GUID to lead into the next step of the process of integrating all that data into the family unit. And since there is family information in the subjects, it only made sense to do it simultaneously. So as that family information is compiled, it's also written into the subject units. And then as each family completes, as it iterates through each family, and it starts a new family, then it writes that output as the last step there. The programming language that we chose to use is the Python programming language, because it's a little more intuitive as far as programming it, and it is very effective at data manipulation. Throughout the program, this is something that I'm actually still working on, but there is data error checking. Make sure that, for the first step, make sure that the titles are there that are supposed to be there, and so on and so forth. And that's an important thing to incorporate throughout the entire program. So as far as data integration for bioinformatics, we need common shared identities and names. So the rigid nature of that data dictionary that came from the National Institute of Mental Health, it does serve a major purpose in creating that shared identity. And then the value ranges normalize the semantics for the second one there, and then shared access, so that each research location can access this data for RDoC. You have to adhere to those standards. As far as I understand from previous years when all this was done manually, and the many hours that were spent putting all this information together every 6 months, if they submitted something that was typed incorrectly, it would get bounced back to them, and you'd have to fix the problems and send it. And so there is that adherence to the standards, and of course that factors into the collection policies and governance from the standpoint of the National Institute of Mental Health. And then the last one mentioned here from Gobble and Stevens is the need to balance the curation of that data with the usability of that data. It's not just about getting the data and piling it up in the corner and saying, yes, we have lots of data. We have to make sure that that data is usable for analysis and categorization and everything that we are working towards as far as precision medicine. This is an interesting hypothetical diagram for the most part. I guess there is some practical usage out there for RDF warehouses, starting to incorporate some of the ideas behind the semantic web, and basically allowing artificial intelligence to assist in the process of integrating data. So hopefully down the line, a lot of what I'm doing for this project for ETL and integration will happen more naturally through the ideals of the semantic web, so that from the researcher standpoint, they just go on a familiar web browser type interface and look up data, and it just knows where it is and takes them to the appropriate location. So just kind of a future look on what future integration of data might look like. So in conclusion, precision in extraction and transformation is essential for data to be used in data analysis and querying. The Python programming language was ideal for extraction, transformation, and we didn't use the program for the loading side of the ETL, but it's consistent, it's quick at manipulating the data, and you're removing the errors of copy and paste, of copying the wrong cell from the original spreadsheet, or the wrong row, putting the wrong individual, and just typos. Anything that may have been a typo in the program that was written would have teased out pretty quickly, because it would have been ubiquitous through the output. So a quick look through the output can tell us whether or not data was transformed appropriately. Data warehouses do provide a mechanism for accuracy, reliability, consistency, as well as remote access for analysis. So here are the references. Down at the bottom I have any questions, and that's my contact information. What I was going to do fairly quickly here is show you how the program runs. You're not going to see a whole lot, so this won't be terribly interesting, but this is the program, running it through Genie here, so it'll give us a little interface as to what the program is doing as it goes. So let's execute it. So right now it's just looking at how to run it. So this is how quickly it goes. So right now it's asking for the source subjects file. I have a few different copies of it, so we'll use this PGM3. This has almost all of the research subjects in it. There are a few idiosyncrasies taken out, so run a little bit more smoothly. Now the National Institute of Mental Health, the GUID source, give it that location to that one, and then just asks us where I want to send the output. I'll specify the output to this location, and now as it runs, you'll see here it got to this family 0148, and there was missing data in there, which I already knew. I keep them in there just to make sure the program's doing what it needs to do. And then when it completes it, it tells you that the two files were created, the family studies and the research subject file, the CSVs. And so you say, okay, it's going to open up the directory where these are located. And you can see here the family studies demographics and the research subjects demographics are there. The program backs up older copies each time it's run, should there be older copies there. So that is basically it. Since it's an ongoing study, I'm not going to pull up any of the information there, even though it's de-identified. It's safe to just leave the data as it is right now. But at this point, we can open this and just double check and make sure that transformation happened appropriately, and that that each file is set to be uploaded. As it is right now, I could upload both those files without even looking at them, but of course we do our due diligence and make sure that everything looks good at this point. And that is basically it. Again, any questions, you can address them to me in our discussion forum, or send me an email at jmiles3@oswego.edu. Thank you very much.